In just a moment, we'll be bringing you our impressions of the latest Warhammer 40k title, Dawn of War 2. But before that, let's get a bit of perspective on this whole Warhammer thing. It all started with these little guys. In 1975, a group of friends, including industry legends Ian Livingstone and Steve Jackson, invented a tabletop fantasy game involving some painted miniatures, a few six-sided dice, and a whole lot of imagination.
The early days of Games Workshop were entertaining, to put it mildly. Gaming hobby did not exist in the 70s, other than board games that we used to import as players from the USA. And Steve Jackson and I decided, we were old school friends, to start a company based on our hobby, which is games. Warhammer role-playing started off first, and it was Warhammer Battles, then Warhammer 40k. And so that's a great big splendorous battle in front of you, which is fantastic.
Now, throughout the 1980s, there were plenty of video games based on Games Workshop properties. The problem is, none of them were based on Warhammer. Non-Warhammer strategy games like Apocalypse and the even less Warhammer Battle Cards would come out for the ZX Spectrum long before we'd ever see a glimpse of the pixelated land of Bretonnia. It would happen eventually, but the game to do it wouldn't be from the original Warhammer fantasy universe, it would be from the futuristic Warhammer 40,000. Ever since the first Warhammer 40k tabletop campaign was released in 1987, the game had become hugely popular. The combination of new setting and incredible miniatures pulled players in, and even sparked interest in turning the Space Marines and their enemies into computer stars. The first game to try was Space Crusade in 1993. Based on the board game of the same name, Space Crusade saw you controlling one of 3 Space Marine squads and facing off against a space station full of Tyranids. Like most early Games Workshop games, it played almost exactly like the board game, but the next Warhammer 40k game would put an end to all that.
Listen carefully.
That game was called Space Hulk. It came out in 1995, and once again you, the Space Marine, had to kill them, the Tyranids.
Die, slime ball.
This time though, the game wasn't anything at all like the tabletop games that had come before it. It was a corridor crawling shooter with a little bit of strategy thrown in for good measure, and it was pretty cool, even if the difficulty level was constantly set to punish mode. Of course, if you really wanted to see punishment, then you didn't have to wait for long, because the very next Warhammer-themed game to make it to computers was based on this brutal ball sport. It was called Blood Bowl, and it was just like a game of American football, except for the fact that you were tossing around the pigskin with a tribe of bloodthirsty Chaos Beastmen. And foul play wasn't just allowed, it was wholeheartedly encouraged. Of course, all that foul play was just a dice roll back then, and it would take until 1995 for this twisted sports sim to make the transition from cardboard to motherboard with Blood Bowl for MS-DOS. Packing everything that made it a classic board game onto a floppy disk, Blood Bowl for PC gave us all the sports strategy action we could handle, and it brought a whole new meaning to the term football hooligan. That very same year, the first proper game to be based on the original Warhammer fantasy battles would finally arrive. Warhammer Shadow of the Horned Rat initiated the Warhammer series into the real-time strategy genre.
Engage!
Pitching the player into a campaign against the Skaven, a race of giant rat men. The game's mix of squad-based tactical combat and 3D visuals would even be popular enough to get it a sequel called Warhammer Dark Omen for both the PC and PlayStation. Over the next couple of years, a lot of turn-based strategy games in the Warhammer mold would be released, but the next really interesting game on the Warhammer timeline was this. Warhammer 40k Fire Warrior was its name, and first-person shooting was its game. For the first time, you didn't play as a human Space Marine. Instead, you took control of a relatively new race, an alien Tau Fire Warrior. You had to go in all guns blazing against the evil forces of chaos, giving Warhammer fans their first chance to actually get up close and personal with the action that they'd usually only see in miniature. Unfortunately though, bland level design and stock standard FPS gameplay was this warrior's downfall, with the game's reception being pretty poor. And that about brings us up to the present. These days, Warhammer fans are getting their fix on various fronts, either through the reigning RTS series Dawn of War, or the World of Warcraft challenging MMO Warhammer Online. Things aren't looking too bad for the future either, with the recent announcement that a reinvention of a cult classic is drawing near. That's right, sports fans, Blood Bowl is coming back in 2009.
When the first word in something's name is super, there's an expectation that it should live up to, or perhaps even surpass its superlative title. Fortunately for us, in the world of console gaming, there's one such name that does exactly that: the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Synonymous with groundbreaking technology, classic gameplay, and iconic characters, the Super Nintendo, or SNES for short, was released in Japan in ye olde days of 1990, although it would take another 2 years to make it to the rest of the world. The console was released in a few different designs, but for now, let's just check out our one. This model is easily the most aesthetically pleasing of the bunch, with some sleek, rounded corners and a classic grey body. For its time, the SNES control pad was also the most advanced ever produced. It was the first gamepad to introduce shoulder buttons, and its design remains influential to this very day, with the PlayStation controller in particular taking plenty of inspiration from its classic layout. But of course, it wasn't the way that it looked that made the SNES a classic, it was the way it played. Take this for example. It's Super Mario World, and it was one of the console's launch games. In fact, for a long time, it actually came bundled with the console. So, if you ever owned a SNES, this game was pretty much impossible to avoid. Not that you'd ever want to avoid it, since it was a game design masterpiece. Produced by Nintendo's resident genius Shigeru Miyamoto, Super Mario World took the Italian plumber to Dinosaur Island, where he once again had to rescue a kidnapped Princess Peach from the terrible Terrapin Bowser. It had more than 70 levels, all of them fun, and it even introduced us to a new character, Yoshi. Mario would have plenty of other outings on the 16-bit console, including a few spin-offs that would become classics in their own right. Super Mario Kart was one of the best of these, and it was also the first time the Mushroom Kingdom crew would take to the track. Using the SNES's advanced texture and scaling rotation capabilities, a feature that was called Mode 7, Mario Kart's tracks were almost three-dimensional, an effect that was innovative for its time. Mario Kart also introduced us to the joys of shooting off red shells, banana peels and lightning bolts, and the racing wasn't too bad either. Apart from Mode 7, the SNES had some other unique technical features, like the Super FX chip, which allowed the console to produce some true 3D graphics. The Super FX chip was only used in a handful of games, the best of which was Starwing, or Star Fox, as it's known internationally. Starwing saw you controlling an anthropomorphic fighter pilot named Fox McCloud on a mission to shoot down a maniacal space emperor's plans for galactic domination. It represents one of the biggest leaps in 3D graphics on a home console, and besides that, it was great fun. During the Super Nintendo's reign, another two of Nintendo's best-loved franchises received the 16-bit treatment. The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past set you on a quest to defeat the evil Ganondorf, although this time you had to conquer two worlds, Dark Hyrule and Light Hyrule. Meanwhile, bounty hunter Samus Aran's Super Nintendo adventure, Super Metroid, saw you controlling the femme fatale through an alien-infested planetoid, where she encountered some of her fiercest enemies, including the space pirate leader, Ridley. Towards the end of the SNES's life cycle, a small game developer from Twycross, England, by the name of Rare, came out with one of the console's biggest hits. It was Donkey Kong Country, and it was the first console game to use pre-rendered 3D models to create its graphics. As a result, it looked amazing, and it had gameplay to match. It revitalized some of Nintendo's oldest characters, introduced us to his new sidekick named Diddy Kong, and it also helped the SNES to maintain its popularity long after the Sony PlayStation was released in 1995. The SNES reinvented the entire Mario back catalogue with Super Mario All-Stars. It also had the first ever home console version of Capcom's Street Fighter II, and it would feature many of Squaresoft's greatest role-playing games, including Final Fantasy VI, Secret of Mana, and Chrono Trigger. Many of the best SNES games have already popped up on the Wii's Virtual Console service, so if you missed out on the 16-bit era, you can still experience these classics via the wonders of digital distribution. But of course, if you want the authentic SNES experience, there's no substitute for the original. Now, if you'll excuse me, I've got a princess to save. When we look back at video game history, we usually only focus on the hero and often forget about how important the supporting cast of characters are. One such supporting cast member is the companion, an ever-present follower who accompanies you on your quest and maybe even does a few menial tasks along the way.
Here's the Danish and coffee you asked for, Badger.
Thank yous.
Well, the earliest game that I can think of that had a companion in it was this. It's called NetHack, and it's a role-playing game first authored in the mid-80s. Depending on what character class you chose, you'd start the game with either a dog, a cat, or a saddled pony. And not only would these pets be your closest companion throughout many a dungeon crawl, but they'd also help you in combat. Because NetHack was drawn completely with text symbols, you had to use your imagination to see that a lowercase d was man's best friend. But for many players, this companion was the original and the best.
There's no sugar in this, is there?
Alright, give it back.
Continuing the cute doggy theme, Sega used a pound puppy to add Bite to Shadow Dancer, a spin-off from the massively popular and successful series Shinobi. Your canine companion's name was Yamato, and he liked the taste of bad guys. In fact, he liked the taste so much that he'd happily bound over obstacles just to sink his teeth into them. Gaming companions didn't just come with 4 legs either. This next one, for example, didn't have any legs at all. A Boy and His Blob was released on the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1989, and, as its title suggests, it featured an amorphous globule as its companion. Blobby would follow you around the game's levels, and you'd have to feed him jelly beans to get him to do things for you, with different flavours producing different abilities. Speaking of different flavours,
the third game in the Mega Man series would also bring with it a companion, and although it was a dog once again, this time at least it was a robo-dog. Rush was the pooch's name, and his robotic companion powers could help Mega Man fly, bounce him up to higher levels, or even transform into a submarine to help him travel underwater.
Too much sugar. Mario may have already had a sidekick in his brother Luigi, but it would take until 1990 for him to get an in-game companion. That companion was Yoshi. Super Mario World introduced us to the little green dinosaur, who would not only carry Mario on his back, but also had a 2-foot-long tongue that ensured he could give any Goomba or Koopa a thorough licking. A few years later, and Sonic the Hedgehog was getting on the companion bandwagon with his own sidekick. That companion was Tails the Fox, and he debuted in Sonic 2 in 1992. He was almost as fast as Sonic, and he could even fly thanks to his helicopter-like tails, although he would usually just follow Sonic around without doing too much to help him.
Kind of like getting him a coffee in Danish, right?
Exactly.
Anyway, a bit closer to the present day, and we have a resurgence of companion-filled games. Tag team heroes like Banjo and Kazooie, Jak and Daxter, and Ratchet and Clank have managed to make pint-sized companions who ride on your back a prerequisite for the platforming genre.
Companions also made a huge impact on us in the 2001 game Eco, where we had to lead a vulnerable princess named Yorda by the hand while keeping us safe from the forces of darkness.
And then there is, of course, Fable 2's Pooch, one companion that you can't really help but fall in love with.
Speaking of lovable, who could forget the companion cube from Portal?
Please escort your companion cube to the Aperture Science Emergency Intelligence Incinerator.
Your time with us was short, but oh so sweet.
So, Badger, we can't mention them all, but what's been your favorite companion from the history of gaming?
For me, Jung, I think the best companions to gaming are a not too sweet, not too bitter cup of coffee, and a good Danish. What do you think, Jung?
I think that particular Danish was a really good companion with the trash can that I found it in. But personally, I can't go past Navi the Fairy from my favorite game ever, The Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time. So, whether it's an inanimate cube, a slobbering hound, or a flying fairy, companions are long overdue to be recognized alongside our better-known video game heroes.
You're a really bad companion.
I know.
Good day.
He's the world's fastest, bluest hedgehog, and he's had one of the rockiest rollercoaster careers of any video game mascot. That's right, good gamers, it's Sonic the Hedgehog. The year was 1991, and the 16-bit Sega Mega Drive console had already been around for a couple of years. Sega already had a mascot in Alex Kidd, a platform game hero who had been their main man since 1986. But to crack the mainstream market and really put a dent in their rival Nintendo's market share, Sega really needed something fresh, and that something was Sonic. The first game in the series saw the spiny sprinter dashing, rolling and jumping through 6 levels of platform game genius, ranging from the lush Green Hill Zone to the industrial scrap Brain Zone and beyond. You had to defeat the insidious Dr. Robotnik, find the powerful Chaos Emeralds, and collect as many gold rings as you could hold along the way. The release of Sonic saw interest in the Mega Drive explode, and by the time Nintendo had a chance to counter with their own Super Mario World, Sega had already won over a huge and loyal fan base. Something that would spark an intense console war over the next couple of years. With the first Sonic becoming a runaway hit, you know there was a sequel in the works, and just 1 year later, in 1992, this came out. Sonic 2 again set the speedy-spined one against Dr. Robotnik and his cronies, although this time he had some help, a two-tailed fox sidekick named Miles Prower, better known as Tails. During the rest of the 16-bit era, Sonic had plenty more hits. The rarely played Sonic CD would become one of the best Sonic games of all time when it came out in 1993, and it was also one of the few truly great games for Sega's failed Mega CD console. The inevitable third installment in the series arrived on the Mega Drive in 1994, and while it wasn't quite as polished as the previous two, it still had much of the same Sonic action we'd grown to love. After that, there were also countless Sonic spin-offs, including Sonic Spinball, a pinball sim with a Sonic twist, the isometric platformer called Sonic 3D, as well as Sonic & Knuckles, a game that didn't just introduce an all-new rival for our hedgehoggy chum, but it also let you play as Knuckles the Echidna through both Sonic 2 and Sonic 3. Even the villains got their own game, with the puzzling Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. With all these classics to his name, Sonic became one of the world's coolest, most respected, and most bankable video game characters of all time. All qualities which he maintains right through to this very day.
We interrupt your scheduled programming to bring you this breaking news update. Despite recent reports, Sonic the Hedgehog has not maintained his cool. Thank you and good night.
Okay, maybe we were sugarcoating Sonic's career a bit there. You see, while Sonic's rise to the height of popularity may have been fast, his decline into the depths of mediocrity has been just as swift. All of Sonic's trouble started with this.
Ready, set, go!
It's called Sonic R, and it was released in 1996 for the Sega Saturn. It was supposed to be a competitor to Nintendo's Mario Kart series, which probably would have been a good idea, apart from the fact that Sonic R was pretty much the worst Sonic game ever made. For starters, there were only 5 tracks, which would give you less than an hour of game time before you finished it. However, since Sonic R had some of the worst racing controls, least interesting track design, and most excruciating gameplay of any mascot racing game, we were actually glad that it was over so quickly. After the tragedy that was Sonic R, making Sonic the Hedgehog's cast of characters fight to the death must have seemed like a good idea. That may have been the reason the next game Sega gave us was this. Sonic the Fighters came out in the same year as Sonic R, and it was just as poorly cobbled together. For its era, it looked good in the graphic department, but any fighting game that lets you win by spamming the same button over and over and over again is just bad game design. Possibly Sonic's most redeeming game from the past decade was Sonic Adventure on the Dreamcast. It came out in 1999 as a launch title for the Dreamcast console, and it was fast, it was fun, and it showed off exactly what the Sega's new hardware was capable of. Of course, for everything that Sonic Adventure did right, it also did something very wrong. The problem was that it was clogged with a whole bunch of superfluous characters that nobody gave a damn about, and it forced you to spend most of your time playing as a fly-fishing cat, a slow-moving robot, or Sonic's girlfriend, Amy Rose, all of which stopped you from doing what you really wanted to do. Just play as Sonic. This trend stuck around when it came to Sonic Adventure 2, which took the series' character overload to all new lows. Sonic Adventure 2 forced an additional 2 new characters on an unsuspecting and unwilling populace, Shadow the Hedgehog and Rogue the Bat. Both of them rubbish. Admittedly, a few of Sonic's smaller game releases over the past decade haven't been all that bad. The Sonic Advance series for the Game Boy Advance, for example, were a rare return to form for the hasty Hedgehog. But for the largest part of his career, Sonic has starred in more bad games than he has good ones. Sonic Shuffle stole Mario Party's board game premise, but forgot to include the fun. Sonic Heroes had more playable characters than you could count on 2 hands, but good gameplay design was nowhere to be seen. Sonic Riders was another attempt to break Sonic into the racing genre, but it barely got out of the pits. And Sonic and the Secret Rings for the Nintendo Wii was a secret that nobody wanted to keep. And as for his most recent outing, Sonic Unleashed, we've just got one word for you: Warehog. What were they thinking? The best career move Sonic has made recently is a cameo appearance in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. But seeing as that's a Nintendo game, we don't think that's too much of a compliment. So, while Sonic may have given us plenty of reasons to love him, please, for your own safety, good gamers, remember to always approach a down-and-out Hedgehog with extreme caution. Ha!
If we're doing a zombie special badge, I think it's about time we turned back the clock and took a look at the history of zombie games backwards compatible style.
And we're talking proper zombies here, Jung, not those phony head crabby or freaky voodoo ones. And don't try and slip any Spanish-speaking alien insect mind control victims either. I'm onto you.
Alright, well if it's real zombies only, then the first one must be this. It's Zombie Zombie for the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, and it came out way back in 1984. In this isometric action strategy game, you had to fly around in your helicopter rebuilding a city infested by the walking undead. The main idea was to build stairways that you could lure the hungry zombies to climb up and then drop them onto the hard concrete from a great height.
It was pretty complex in concept, and in execution it wasn't much simpler. Which meant that Zombie Zombie didn't really take off. It was, however, the first game to establish the long tradition of games taking inspiration from the movies of legendary master of horror George A. Romero.
Wave of murder which is sweeping the eastern third of the nation is being committed by creatures who feast upon the flesh of their victims.
Romero practically invented the modern zombie genre with his 1968 debut, Night of the Living Dead. This film introduced all the things we associate with zombies today, including their slow, meandering shuffle and their insatiable hunger for human flesh. And as a result, his films have influenced practically every zombie-themed video game ever made.
One game where that influence was particularly obvious was this. It was simply called Zombie, a point-and-click adventure released by Ubisoft in 1990, and its storyline and situation was totally plagiarized from George Romero's second zombie film, 1979's Dawn of the Dead. In the game, you had to lead a team of 4 survivors through a shopping mall that was teeming with the reanimated dead. The game was extremely challenging due to the fact that the zombies would appear without any warning. And if they got enough bites on you, your characters would even turn into zombies themselves.
Another game that could turn you into a zombie just by playing it was this 1994 stinker for the Sega Mega CD.
Balana zombie poopa! Kenwa welcome wagon. Light 'em up.
Released at the peak of the full-motion video craze, Corpse Killer ditched traditional video game graphics in favor of using real actors to fill out its cast of characters. Or at least they claim to be real actors.
Good shooting, brah. Yeah, man. Lots of buzzard meat.
In actual fact, these so-called thespians were so awful, they made zombification seem like an attractive option.
Cool toy. I bet you know how to turn it on. And I bet you know how to do a lot of things.
Well, on that note, I think it's time we got to some good zombie games, don't you, John?
How about Resident Evil?
Oh my god, oh my god! When the first Resident Evil game came out for the PlayStation in 1996, it finally gave zombie fanboys like me something to get excited about. It introduced most of us to the nail-biting terror of the survival horror genre, scared half of us to death with a constant barrage of unexpected zombie attacks, and had us scratching our heads in bewilderment over how we should best organise our suitcases.
Over the years, the series has gone from strength to strength, with the evil bioweapons manufacturer, the Umbrella Corporation, and the members of the Elite Stars team locking in battle in no less than 6 direct sequels and several spin-off games. Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil Code Veronica are generally regarded to be 2 of the best games in the series. While personally, I think Resident Evil 4 is.
Don't even mention it, Junk. They're not real zombies and you know it.
Alright then, if not Resident Evil 4, what's your favorite zombie game?
One of my faves has to be Zombie Ate My Neighbours. I remember playing so much of it on my Sega Mega Drive when it first came out in 1993. It was a horror comedy shoot-'em-up that was based heavily on classic B-grade fright flicks, and I remember having way too much fun with it. I do also have a soft spot for Sega's House of the Dead series though, just because it's so hard not to love any game where you can dual-wield 2 light guns while shooting lots of zombies in their noggins.
Well, lucky for you, there's more of that later in the show. I never liked any of those games, but Capcom's Dead Rising rates pretty highly on my zombie-o-meter. This was another game that took huge, meaty chunks of inspiration from the films of George Romero. It put you in the role of investigative photojournalist Frank West, who becomes stranded in a shopping mall filled with zombies. And they weren't there for the after-Christmas sales either. They were there for your brains. Apart from that, any unconditional zombie love has to go out to Valve Software's Left 4 Dead. The 4-player co-op mode against a never-ending army of brain-thirsty monsters was a total blast.
Here they come!
And the undead versus human competitive mode sealed the deal for me.
Turn around, man!
Making this my favorite zombie game of all time. That and Resident Evil 4.
No, don't even mention it, Junk. They're not real zombies and you know it.
They're dead and they're walking, they're zombies.
I'm not listening anymore.
Right, you're not gonna... Alright, that's nasty.
Good day!
It's that time of year again, good gamers.
But now, let's take a break looking for eggs of a chocolatey kind and take a look at some super secret gaming Easter secrets.
It all started in 1979 with a game called Adventure for the Atari 2600. It was a primitive kind of dungeon-crawling game with a confusing labyrinth of corridors filled with countless strange and misshapen creatures wanting to do you in. But of course, it also had a hidden secret. If you made your way to a specific room in the ominously named Black Castle, picked up a hidden object, took it to another room and used it on a particular wall, this would happen. You'd get a secret message from the game's creator, Warren Robinett. You see, back in the old days, game designers weren't given due credit, and in fact, Atari had a strict policy against acknowledging their employees for their work. So, as a last resort, many Atari employees would hide their name or initials somewhere in the game as a secret. These hidden secrets became known as Easter eggs, and they quickly started appearing in other Atari games. Like this famous Easter egg found in 1981 shoot-'em-up classic Yarn's Revenge, the initials of its creator and programmer Howard Scott Warshaw. So that's how all this eggy business began, and over the years, Easter eggs have evolved to include ever weirder surprises. One example that had more than its fair share of Easter eggs is The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past. The best known of these is the classic chicken revenge attack, where if you victimized a defenseless chicken for long enough, the bird would let out an almighty caw, summoning a squadron of furious killer chickens to teach you a lesson in animal cruelty. The Easter egg proves so popular that it's been included in practically every Zelda game since. But A Link to the Past also had a far more interesting secret that you probably haven't heard about. In 1990, Nintendo ran a competition to find one kid they could bestow video game immortality upon, and that kid was named Chris Houlihan. Nintendo gave Chris his own room in the game, and while it was almost impossible to access, requiring incredibly precise timing to find, it was definitely worth it. Not only did the secret room give you a fortune in rupees, but it also showed you a message from Chris himself. No one really knows who the kid was or what he's doing now, but wherever he is, he's officially a part of Zelda history, and we're jealous. The hellish dimension of id Software's Doom 2 may seem like an unlikely place to find some Easter festivity, but this game has another of the gaming industry's most notable eggy-waggies. The first clue that something Easterish was afoot was this. What was that? Sounds like gibberish to you? Well, you're wrong, and we're about to show you just how wrong you are. Let's hear that again, but this time using the technological marvel that is audio manipulation.
To win the game, you must kill me, John.
What did this ghostly message mean? Was the game's co-creator, John Romero, approving the use of physical violence on him just to beat the video game he made? Not quite, but almost. By using a cheat that allowed you to go through solid walls, you could walk right through the last boss's face and into a tiny chamber where you would find the zombie head of John Romero on a stick. Presented with a sight like that, what else was there to do? A few left mouse clicks later and Zombie Romero was sent back to the hell from whence he came, and we just witnessed one of the best gaming Easter eggs ever. When you're talking about something as massive as a massively multiplayer online game, you know that someone must have sneaked some crazy stuff in there somewhere. And when it comes to the biggest MMO of them all, World of Warcraft has this. Step 1, find a chicken. The birds milling around Saldane's farm in Westfall will do fine. Next, you need to do the chicken dance in front of the foul beast almost 100 times, which will not only test your patience, but also your keyboard. Eventually, the animal will acknowledge your presence with a quizzical look and issue you with a special quest. Complete the quest and the chicken will join you as your travelling companion for life, or at least until you abandon your WoW account. If a hidden chicken quest isn't a literal enough Easter egg for you, then there is always this hidden secret in Rockstar Games' Grand Theft Auto Vice City. Although it was well hidden behind a fake wall on the side of a skyscraper, once you'd found this surprise, there was no mistaking it, because it was actually an Easter egg. The chocolate orb simply sat on a pedestal in a tiny room, and its only real purpose was to poke fun at you for being obsessive enough to find it. And on that note, I think we've found enough Easter eggs for this year. But since stashing secret stuff in games never goes out of fashion, there'll always be a never-ending supply of super sweet secrets waiting to be found. Just don't find too many, kids. They're bad for your teeth, you know.
Good game.
Today we celebrate a very special birthday. It's been 20 years since kids all over the world stopped begging their mums and dads for a Donkey Kong Game & Watch and started begging them for a Game Boy. That's right, Nintendo's favorite handheld console is nearly 2 decades old, and we're still feeling its 8-bit impact today. Invented by Gunpei Yokoi, the brain behind the Game & Watch and producer of the first Metroid, the Game Boy was a black and green screen unit that ran on 4 AA batteries. In form and function, it took its cues from the massively popular NES, going with a D-pad and 2-button control scheme, big gray games, and needing to blow into the cartridge slot to make the thing work. Like every new Nintendo system, the Game Boy featured fresh installments in classic series. From launch title Super Mario Land, which sent the plumber to the far-off kingdom of Sarasaland to defeat an evil alien and collect some coins, to The Legend of Zelda Link's Awakening, in which our hero forgets Ganon and the Triforce for a while to focus on finding enough musical instruments to wake up a giant fish, and Metroid 2 Return of Samus, which wasn't quite as well loved as the original, but did include battery backup so you could save your game. Then of course there was Tetris. Tetris came bundled with the system, so even if your parents wouldn't spring for a copy of Bart Simpson's Escape from Camp Deadly or Alleyway, you'd still have something to play. And it was so addictive it spawned a psychological term, the Tetris effect, which is when you can't stop mentally fitting shapes together even in everyday life, or while you're asleep. Game Boy was also the launchpad for Nintendo's second biggest cash cow, Pokémon. Released late in the original unit's lifetime, Pokémon Red and Blue were interconnected RPG titles that launched an entertainment juggernaut, spanning TV, cinema, and a collectible card game. Oh, and 1,000 or so other Pokémon video games. In 1996, a streamlined version of the console, the Game Boy Pocket, was released. It was thinner, required less batteries, and the screen was clearer. Nintendo also put out a range of Game Boy accessories for the Game Boy, like the Game Boy camera, the Game Boy printer, and the Game Boy. By 1997, Nintendo had sold 60 million of these things. These massive sales figures came despite the fact that, unlike rival handhelds such as the Atari's Lynx and Sega's Game Gear, Game Boy stayed proudly monochromatic. Well, at least until 1998, when technological advances allowed for an enhanced palette without chewing through batteries. The Game Boy Color was short-lived, replaced in 2000 by the Game Boy Advance. Then came the backlit Game Boy Advance SP, followed by the last of the line, the Game Boy Micro. The Game Boy name was retired with the company's next handheld, the Nintendo DS. But that doesn't mean we can't rescue a kidnapped princess or two in its honor. Women. They've been in games since time immemorial, getting kidnapped by giant apes, monstrous turtle kings, street gangs, and whatever the hell Ganon was. But tonight we're talking about women who smashed the glass ceiling, making the transition from victim to heroine, and it all starts with Ms. Pac-Man. Armed with a pretty red bow and an appetite for pellets to match her husband's, Ms. Pac-Man chomped her way through haunted maze after haunted maze. The game was originally an unauthorized sequel by Midway, but overwhelming popularity led to it being adopted as an official part of the series. And if you look closely, the orange ghost is a lady as well. Moving into the home, classic NES title Metroid was justly beloved for its dark atmosphere and non-linear gameplay. Samus Aran's gender was revealed in a twist ending involving a red bikini, causing thousands of young boys who thought they'd been playing a tough male cyborg to throw down their controllers in disgust. Clearly, they got over it, because there are 9 more games in the massively successful line. The intrepid bounty hunter has done battle with space pirates and Metroids all across the galaxy, as well as stopping by to tear Diddy Kong a new one in the Super Smash Bros. Series. In the mid-80s, a revolutionary cabinet hit the streets. 4 people could play Atari's hack-and-slasher Gauntlet at the same time, as Warrior, Wizard, Elf, or Valkyrie. Although she was average when it came to speed and strength, Thyra the Valkyrie had the best armor. This meant she'd often survive the endless onslaught of ghosts, demons, and lobbers longer than her companions, as long as the elf didn't shoot the food. Thyra paved the way for Tyrus Flare, the longsword-toting, fire-spouting, dinosaur-riding Amazon with a golden axe to grind against Death Adder. She was so mad at the villainous giant that she forgot to put her armor on over her underwear. These days, she's much more properly attired for combat.
The gods always demand sacrifice.
Sometime in the 90s, Capcom's Street Fighter II exploded into international popularity, chewing up pocket money like E-Honda chews up burgers. While most road warriors fell for the macho allure of Ken, Ryu, or Guile, true champions knew it took the most skill to defeat the game with the first playable female character in a fighting game, Chun-Li. The Chinese martial artist was on a mission to avenge her father's death, and she didn't care how many Brazilian beastmen she had to spinning bird kick to do so. Chun-Li wasn't alone in the fight for feminism for long. She paved the way for fellow Street Fighter babes like Cammy, not to mention Mortal Kombat's Sonya, Tekken's Nina, and Virtua Fighter's Sarah. Funny how they're all blondes, though. Possibly the most famous and beloved of all video game vixens, aside from Passionate Patty from Leisure Suit Larry 3, is the Tomb Raider herself, Lara Croft. Making her debut in 1996, Lara was the ultimate thinking man's pinup. With a genius-level IQ, a personal fortune, effortless cool, and Olympic-level athletic ability, she's the Indiana Jones you can have an unashamed crush on. Who would have thought a hard-as-nails, no-nonsense babe with such a massive, expansive, delightful arsenal would appeal to the traditional gamer market? In Lara's wake came a whole host of attractive, empowered women who weren't afraid to kick ass, take names, and inspire fan art in the process.
My name is Joanna Dark.
From Joanna Dark to Jill Valentine to Coco Bandicoot, these self-sufficient ladies had one thing in common: cool names and dark backstories. Alright, that's two things. 21st century heroines have continued the feminist tradition started by Ms. Pac-Man back in '81. Cameo used her elemental powers to save her family and spirit buddy. Heavenly Sword's Noriko fought monsters and the sexual prejudices of her people. Faith from Mirror's Edge battled an unjust government with highly advanced gymnastic skills. And the DOA babes played volleyball.
Controversy. It can make a game famous, or it can doom it to obscurity, and there's plenty of examples of both in the pages of gaming history. First up, the most common cause of video game notoriety, violence. And when it comes to the earliest days of arcade gaming, few games top the pedestrian pummeling carnage of Death Race. That's right, good gamers, this is what the most violent and controversial game of 1976 looked like. It was truly a shocking black and white pixel fest, where badly drawn cars collided with badly drawn pedestrians, which would not only end their miserable lives, but would also earn you lots of points. As a result, it was one of the first video games to cause large-scale unrest amongst easily offended parent associations, who promptly took to the streets to protest the game's depravity. But did it really deserve its bad name? Probably not, and here's why. The game took its name and inspiration from the 1975 film Death Race 2000, a cheaply made exploitation flick produced by the king of B-grade movies, Roger Corman. It starred David Carradine and Sylvester Stallone as rival race drivers in a contest to see who could run over the most pedestrians before they reached the finish line.
Women are still worth 10 points more than men in all age brackets. The big score, anyone, any sex, over 75 years old, has been upped to 100 points.
It was fantastically trashy stuff, but it was fun, and today it's considered a cult classic.
Oh, shit!
Same premise, different delivery method, but did Death Race 2000 cause as much controversy as its video game counterpart? Of course it didn't. In fact, apart from a few poor reviews, the movie version of Death Race didn't cause much of a ruckus at all. Meanwhile, the video game version was driven out of business, with the game's publisher, Exidy, forced to cease production of the game after making only 500 units. So, if there's one thing we've learnt so far, it's that controversy isn't fair. Games usually come off second best when compared to other entertainment mediums. And if there's one topic that causes even more trouble than violence, it's sex in video games. Something this next game learned the hard way. Phantasmagoria was a graphic adventure game that was way ahead of its time, which happened to be 1997. It brought together intense psychological horror with logical puzzling, exploration, and full motion video graphics to create one of the best adventure games of the 90s. And on top of all that, it was very much made for adults.
Somebody kept me up last night.
You didn't seem to mind so much last night.
Oh, no.
In fact, it was so made for adults that if you managed to get far enough into the game, or even just up to the game's intro movie, you'd wind up being treated to some side boob in one of the game's numerous simulated sex scenes. The game was promptly banned by the authorities. After its ban, Phantasmagoria did actually end up causing controversy, although it wasn't because of its questionable content, it was because people were outraged that it got banned. It was the first game to really shed light on the inconsistencies of the Australian classification system. And it was the beginning of the public call for an R18+ rating for games.
5 teenage girls have disappeared after spending the night at the old Lakeshore Winery house of Mr. and Mrs. Victor Martin. Right now, another 5 girls are headed towards the Martins to spend the night. Your mission? Protect those girls from whatever happened to the last ones.
Night Trap for the Sega CD scared up some controversy with its scantily clad teenage girls being stalked by creepy vampire burglars, all in grainy full-motion video.
Music!
The Leisure Suit Larry game, Magna Cum Laude, was thrown out of the country by Australian censors due to its unwholesome bedroom behaviour.
Larry, let's go to the library and knock boots.
No, we did that yesterday. Let's do it in the planetarium.
Why not right here?
And of course, who could forget the commotion caused by Grand Theft Auto San Andreas when it was found that the game contained a little hidden hot coffee.
How about a little coffee?
Simply scandalous. But in this case, the scandal wasn't such a bad thing, with sales of GTA games soaring into the stratosphere. As sexy as games have become over the years, it's still violence that makes most of the headlines. Ever since it first came out in 1992, Mortal Kombat has made its name with its controversy. The game's over-the-top biffo and tongue-in-cheek fatalities, which often involve decapitation, dismemberment, or combustion of your opponent, helped generate a media backlash big enough to ensure that Mortal Kombat turned into a gaming legend. Others didn't fare so well though, like Rockstar Games' Manhunt.
Okay, are you ready? Camera, action.
The ultra-violent stealth horror game Manhunt was initially cleared for release in Australia with an MA15+ rating, after which it happily sat on store shelves for several weeks. That is, until then Attorney General Philip Ruddock lodged a complaint that saw the game banned from sale. Manhunt was actually an incredibly well-made horror game, and the ever-present gruesomeness only helped to reinforce its intense atmosphere. To the rest of the world though, it is usually held up as the most shocking example of video game violence, and with scenes like this, it was easy to see why. We could go on and on, but we think you get the idea. The bottom line is that if you're making a game, controversy can work for you. But most of the time, it's just going to get you banned.
So we all now know that games can be entertaining, but they can also educate you about stuffs. Put the two together and you've got a little something called edutainment. Take this for example. Math Grand Prix and Word Zapper, two of the earliest games for the Atari 2600, attempted to teach you a few basic literacy and mathematical skills. They came out in 1982, and while Math Grand Prix challenged you with multiplication, addition, subtraction, and division equations, with each correct answer propelling your racer along the track towards the finish line, Word Zapper was all about gunning down an invading army of letters to spell out important words like shoot and alien. Funny that. So, were they any good? No, they weren't really, but there were certainly worse ways to practice your sums and spelling. However, it would be just a few years later when American game developer Broderbund Software came up with an edutainment game that was a bit heavier on the tainment. That game was Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego? And it's probably still the best known and most loved edutainment title of all time. It saw you take on the role of a globe-trotting sleuth on the trail of a notorious international criminal, Miss Sandiego herself. You'd travel the globe, stopping at the world's most exotic cities, and learn trivia about the region's geography and local customs before making your arrest. Spend too long sightseeing and your suspect would get away. Now, although this next game was never very popular in Australia, for reasons that will soon become obvious, it was very popular in North America and is also considered one of the best edutainment games ever made. Oregon Trail was its name, and it let players experience the trials and tribulations of the earliest white American settlers attempting to follow the titular trail to the Wild West. It was more of a strategy game than anything else. You had to hunt wild animals for food and profit, manage your supplies and funds, keep your covered wagons on the right path, and most importantly of all, avoid dying of dysentery. While the cultural significance is mostly lost on an international audience, the game is still pretty good, making learning about foreign cultures easy. But that can't be said for all edutainment games. In fact, there are some educational disasters that would make a week of detention seem like fun. Like this, for example. Sometime during the 90s, Nintendo thought it might be a good idea to license their mascot Mario and his brother Luigi to any company that would make edutainment games based on the two super siblings. The result was several awful games, including this one, Mario's Time Machine. The idea of the game was to give kids a history lesson. The only problem was the game was way too complicated for any school-aged youngster to understand. You had to travel to different time periods, learning different facts to fill in a book, and that's pretty much it. It was made even worse by these awful bits, where you had to surf for absolutely no reason at all just to travel back in time. These days, we've been absolutely inundated with edutainment games. Every foreign language has its own coaching video game, usually on the DS, and stuff like Dr. Kawashima's Brain Training and all of its numerous spin-offs and knockoffs promise to exercise your brain muscle. However, out of all of them, our favorite edutainment title of all time has to be this. There have been numerous games aiming to teach you to type, but there's only one that lets you touch-type hordes of undead zombies back to the death that they once avoided dying. It is, of course, Typing of the Dead. It came out in arcades and for the Sega Dreamcast in the year 2000, and it's basically just a remake of the House of the Dead 2, except instead of being equipped with lethal pistols, your agents are kitted out with a keyboard with the power to re-kill the undead. Not only did the game teach you how to type fast, it also taught you how to not have your brains eaten. Both essential life skills.
The past few weeks have brought us some sad news about one of the legendary studios in the world of computer game development, 3D Realms. While the dev team behind Duke Nukem Forever may have officially left the building, we thought we'd take a look back at the work and legacy of 3D Realms, backwards compatible style. The 3D Realms story actually begins in the mid-80s with a shareware developer and publisher named Apogee Games, and with games like this. It's called Dungeons of Kroz, and it was a maze-based action game with a fantasy theme. Although you could hardly tell because Kroz's visuals were so primitive that pretty much everything on the screen looked like a big square block. Of course, Apogee didn't just have their games, they also had a unique way of selling them. They practically invented the modern-day shareware formula, where they gave away a portion of the game for free, but made you pay if you wanted the entire experience. It was a formula that worked well, so well in fact that Apogee started publishing other developers' games as well as their own. One of these was id Software, and some of the best games they ever made were the Commander Keen series. The Keen game spanned several sequels, all of which put you underneath the helmet of a kid named Billy Blaze, who had to head jump and shoot his way to defeat an insidious alien race called the Vorticons. Apogee was also responsible for publishing heaps of other shareware games, including id Software's Wolfenstein 3D, the Aussie-developed Alien Carnage, and the lovably awful Cosmo's Cosmic Adventure. But it would be a certain blonde-haired, tank-top muscle man who would really make their name as a game developer. It was, of course, Duke Nukem. With a tough, trash-talking protagonist, a plot involving an ever-reliable alien invasion, and a barrel full of platform action awesomeness, Duke Nukem quickly became one of those PC games that everyone had to have when it was released in 1991. It was followed up with a sequel 2 years later, Duke Nukem 2.
I am back.
Which was in every way bigger, ballsier, and more beautiful than its predecessor. But the Apogee name wasn't destined to stick around forever. With the introduction and subsequent popularity of three-dimensional games, the company changed its name to one more fitting of the times, 3D Realms. And one of the first games to come out under their new moniker was probably their biggest and best. That's right, Duke was back, and this time he was in 3D, in a game called, funnily enough, Duke Nukem 3D. Taking inspiration from id Software's Doom, Duke 3D was a first-person shooter, although it looked far better than anything else on the market at the time. It had plenty of action, over-the-top violence and explosions to keep the trigger-happy occupied, but Duke 3D also added a new and totally unexpected element, LOLs. Epic LOLs, in fact.
Come get some.
Duke was always quick with the one-liner, which is still admired today for their vulgarity and wit. While the game's often risque settings and situations left a smile on many a gamer's face when it came out in 1996. Alongside Duke 3D, 3D Realms have either developed or published many other hit games over the years. They had huge success in the first-person shooting genre with games like Rise of the Triad. They took the Duke Nukem formula to a modern-day fantasy feudal Japan with Shadow Warrior. They even took a stab at the sword and sorcery genre with the Witch Haven series. And they were the producers behind the film noir-inspired Max Payne, one of the best shoot-'em-ups of its time, and plenty of other games besides. But after all of this came the big one, a game so ambitious and long in production that it has become a thing of gaming legend, Duke Nukem Forever. Duke's new game was to be the follow-up to the blockbusting Duke 3D, and it was going to feature graphics supplied by the same technology that powered id Software's Quake 2. It was first announced in 1997, and it was originally supposed to launch the very next year. But that didn't really happen. You see, Duke Nukem Forever hit a massive developmental brick wall. Instead of sticking with the Quake 2 engine and releasing the game, 3D Realms made a decision that would alter the course of their game and ultimately their company. In an effort to keep Duke Nukem Forever's graphics cutting edge, 3D Realms decided to transport the entire game to the Unreal Engine, the newest and prettiest tech on the block for 1998. The game looked good, and it was now set to come out in 1999. But that didn't happen either. In fact, Duke Nukem Forever had been variously slated for release in 2000, 2001, 2002, pick pretty much any year in the 2000s, and Duke Nukem Forever was supposed to be launched in it, but it just never did. In 2007, we finally saw another glimpse of Duke's flat-topped head in this teaser trailer, which only served to remind us that the game was still in production after 10 long years. Finally, in May of 2009, after 12 years in development hell, there was another twist in the Duke Nukem Forever story when it was announced that 3D Realms didn't have the funds to continue working on the game. The company simply packed the game up, and with very little fanfare, they gave the development team the sack. But with the vaporous ghost of Duke Nukem Forever hanging over their legacy, 3D Realms will be remembered for quite some time as one of the most successful and ill-fated developer stories in the history of games.